You have the floor, Mr. Anderson.
May it please the court. So this is closing argument summation, and last night I couldn't sleep very well, obviously, for all the reasons, and I was rolling around, and then I woke up, and it just came to me that we've been spending 9 weeks together, and you know what I know, and I know how I reacted to all the facts. And realizing that, suddenly I just had a great comfort and confidence, and I went to sleep because I don't have to do that much convincing, nor would I try to do that much. I'm going to try up here to make some connections for you, to try to help you back there, to give you some tools to work with. Now, I'm going to be up here the first time for about an hour and 15 minutes, out of which about 20 minutes Mr. Whitney is going to come up and help with some of the verdict form math. That is not my forte, so we decided to split it up right there and give you the best we do. And then a couple hours for these guys, and then I'll come up for a final 45 minutes and rebut whatever they're saying and make some closing argument. So what we have here is a great American. They're hardworking. They are devout. They are patriots. They have done everything a family should do. And none of what happened to them, it should not. Your job, figure out why it happened to them, how it happened, what ends up being just. In this case, for reasons that I still cannot fathom anyways, Johns Hopkins, doctors who are supposed to harm, blew up. It's beyond me. And I just have a difficult time understanding motivation. I understand more based on what we heard there at the last from Dr. Cochran about some of the whys of how it would happen. And Nick has reminded me, and I want to say this out of the box, for certain reasons legally, when I say none of this or all of this, this that I am talking about is what happened to Maya back Beatty. That is what I'm talking about, period, October 7th through, that's what I'm saying when I'm saying this, none of this, or all of this. So the problem here is that by what pressures they put on Beata Kowalski, they took her out of the, and she was, without a doubt, the quarterback. Jack, amazing. But Beata was capable of incredible amounts of work, tenderness, love, passion. But she was also of an Eastern European background, and she could be brusque, but she was a lioness protecting her family. And we get into eventually what happened on that October 7th afternoon. And I want you to think about if Johns Hopkins had not changed diagnosis that quickly over that particular day for reasons to get into, none of it happened. And that's medical. They did absolutely no research. They did not bring in experts. They did not have anybody who knew what they... And from the Kowalski standpoint, 6 days before, they had been back in with the same complaint, as gastroparesis, which from CRPS. And here they come in 6 days later, and it's completely changed. Now they're somehow treated like they're treated as though there's something wrong with them, even though, consider it from their point of view, they've been in hospital since literally before any of the CRPS symptoms started. They'd been going there for 15 months, and they'd never had a problem. They'd had support. And let me tell you, I don't think that everybody at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital was bad, wrong, or evil. There were some good people over there. Some of their outpatient doctors were superb, but something was very wrong with this. And as I was saying, I think Dr. Cochran got to the heart of it. Culture. It seems to me that any time you put together an organization, no one speak up. No one can comment on anything that's going to rock the boat. You're going to get this type of... You're going to get a situation where a Kathy Beatty can run wild, and no one will catch her, no one will slow her down, no one will get her out of this, away from Maya. There simply was no accountability at this place, none. So what you're trying to do now, and the way I was really thinking about it was, why don't I go through some of Johns Hopkins' defenses? Because I figured that if we got rid of the defenses, then all that would be left would be our case. And then it would be much easier for you to make up your minds about things. So if you look at some of their theories that we heard in the opening statement, one was that Maya had come in emaciated and they saved her because they put weight back on her. If you check out Dr. Wassenauer's weight, she was 27 kilograms 1 week when she went in there, and she was 27 kilograms when she was out 2 weeks later. So that theory's gone. That they had kept her off or gotten her off a bunch of drugs. You can look at the admission to see what meds she was on at the time. You can discharge summary and see how similar it is. Nothing there. They argued that ketamine bad, ketamine scary. Ketamine worked, and they themselves in their own routines and methodologies. They actually had a ketamine infusion process. So it wasn't the fact of infusing ketamine. What it was dosage. And they tried to scare everybody with the idea that these dosages were extraordinarily high. They worked, didn't they? They worked. And you know this because if you take a look at the progress through January through August of 2016 and the videos we showed you about how well Maya was coming along here, you can see how well they worked. Through all of this, keep in mind there was never a bad lab. Usually, if there's a drug that's going to really mess you up, if you are having some significant problems, one of the things you do is you look for the blood test for the liver primarily. What you're looking for here is to see if there's any substantial changes. Nowhere can they show you any continued or even, I don't think, any abnormal liver test. That's an objective test that would tell you whether or not this was the wrong medicine or the too much medicine. They argued that Maya's recovery was all due to them. Well, no, it really wasn't. And she didn't really recover. She did much better. CRPS, as you know, is a disease that she's going to have the rest of it. It's something that you manage. And so by taking her back so many steps, they made things so much worse for her. And it was only Maya's self-discipline and will. And I believe the idea in her head is that she wanted to prove to her mom that she could It had nothing to do with Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. And she was not cured. And she did not end up with no symptoms. On November 20th, she ended up with a terrible relapse. You'll see the photos of her with a feeding tube down her. And I mean, the one thing that struck out with me was that if you looked at her clavicle right here, she didn't even look like the same girl. That's how bad that relapse. And then if you look at Dr. Henschke's records, you'll see that she had another one in 2022. It was simply Maya had not recovered. Everything that she did herself. And in spite of Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. So what else have they tried to say? What are their other defenses? Well, they blame Beata for taking her own life. And although we'll get into a lot of this more, the fact is that Beata was reacting to a maternal instinct that she had almost no, and in fact, no ability to control. It was the same thing as a mother jumping out in front of a truck to push a 2-year-old out of the way, knowing that it would. And when there's a competition between the maternal instinct and the self-preservation instinct, the maternal instinct will win each time. Now, start on a couple slides here to get it rolling. The concept here is that none of Johns Hopkins' defenses that they put out in their opening or tried through the course of the case ever panned out. What they did in this case was pick around the edges and try to convince you that somehow you should doubt this poor girl, that somehow you should doubt Beata. And here she is with a relapse. Let's start at the beginning. Friday, October 7th, 2016. Before this was an incredibly happy family and a good, strong marriage and a mom who was overwhelmingly in support of her children. She was proud to be Polish. She was proud to share her heritage and the focus of her love for her children. She loved Jack, but those children were the center of her. Jack Kowalski is an amazing man. And one of the things that I really resented through all this is the idea that this man, who is a deputy fire chief, who ran into burning buildings, was somehow a Casper Milquetoast and wouldn't take any steps to control his wife. That is about the farthest thing from the truth. He's a quiet man. You saw him on the stand here. But in no way, shape, or form does he lack bravery. Next one. And then 99 days later, I want to talk about the big overview of this. They go in, a happy family. Maya has CRPS, but Beata found a way. She worked her rear end off, locating the right physician. Does anybody notice that all of the speculation about conversion disorder all came about before she was diagnosed by Dr. Patrick? If you look after that point and up until January 7th, nobody thought about that after the proper diagnosis. And all of the hospitals that considered, and never even diagnosed, but considered conversion disorder had one thing in common. They missed the CRPS diagnosis, right? So if you look after September 23rd of 2015, after Dr. Kirkpatrick made the appropriate diagnosis, you see that all tapered off because now they knew. Now it made sense. Beata finally got Maya to somebody who knew what they were talking. She had solved the problem as best as the problem could be solved. CRPS is not something you can solve completely, but you know what? She found a way. She found a way to deal with it for her little girl. She found a way to get through this to the best of her ability and Maya's ability and give Maya the best life she possibly could. She went to doctor after doctor after doctor, searching. All of those that they want to blame on her somehow, that Beata was going to too many physicians. This was all before it was actually a diagnosis made. Of course she's going to do that. She's going to try to find an answer. And she found an answer. And I suggest to you that but for what Johns Hopkins did to this family, it would have been in control. And they would have gone on with their lives to the same successes, and they would have overcome this disease. And they could have gone on very, very happy with Beata there, and each of them able to live their lives as they wanted to. Afterwards, coming out, what do we know? Well, we know that mom's gone. Daughter is so weak she can barely keep herself upright in the car and needs pillows to be able to support herself. We know her CRPS is immeasurably worse. We know the family is in tatters. They have lost in many ways everything that made them up. They still have the love for each other, but they lost the driving. Nothing was cured. Nothing was made better. Nothing was done to justify that time in there, except, of course, make Johns Hopkins a little more money, about $534,000. Here, you see, she still had the dystonia. And you know what? I had 4 doctors come in talking about about CRPS, and I could have called more, but I figured you'd had just about all that you needed to hear about CRPS, right? So I didn't call everybody that possibly treated her. I was on the clock a bit. What I did do was try to get through enough of them so you would understand exactly what was going on here and be able to identify it. And then I used video and audio and photograph to demonstrate all of the symptoms. I don't think there's any question but that Maya has and had CRPS, which then raises the question of why were these doctors on that day? Why did they shift from the diagnosis in all of their records to that point, CRPS, and go back to some psychosomatic thing? Why go back to something that 4 or 5 different experts had? Why would you abandon something 5 or 6 expert firm and go back to something that you could only find pre-diagnosis and as speculation from a lot of other hospitals, not even a lot, too. So on October 1st, as I said, she comes in, she's got the same thing, abdominal pain worsening. The diagnosis is what I was saying, regional pain disorder was the same thing as CRPS, right? She has a milkshake, her ketamine treatment, she goes in, and here's what happens. She was only in for about 24 hours, right? And she came out, and they had dealt with it. The same thing would have happened on October 7th, but for whatever went on that afternoon, she would have been in and out and continued on her way to recover. So what happened on October 7th, 6 days after the last time she was in, exactly the same thing. In mind, she'd been into this place over 17 times before that. Don't you think if there was some sort of psychosomatic condition, the over 50 doctors that saw her beforehand would have found that out? Couldn't they have figured that out? The Johns Hopkins, she'd even been admitted twice before this. They were locked in to a confirmation of CRPS. So you've got Jack going up. It wasn't Beata. It's Jack bringing her in, and she's in extreme pain over and above the usual CRPS. Now, I don't know what went on here through all of this, but I have an idea. They find out from Dr. Hannah that she's getting ketamine booster treatment. Dr. Hannah lets them know, and they already basically knew. And in their records was Dr. Kirkpatrick diagnosing, an expert. Everybody knew. How did it change so much? I will come back and happen. But there was something happened that changed everything and caused this hospital to come away with the idea that they had to prove that Maya did not have CRPS, she didn't have pain, and do everything they possibly could to try to convince her, a 10-year-old girl, 11-year-old girl, that she wasn't feeling, and to put the maximum amount of pressure on Beata. What would do this? So leading up to this, one of the things they talk about are the amazing number of infusions. I want to point out something else around here. One of their big reasons for needing to keep Maya there was withdrawal, that somehow ketamine was like an opiate. You had to keep her there to wean her off, or she would be physiologically harmed in some way, right? Take a look at the number of times that she had an infusion, which are in green, and all the red are the periods between those. And if you look at the medical records, nothing in those records ever shows a single sign of any withdrawal. There's no shaking, and there's no runny nose or jitters. There's no raised blood pressure for no apparent reason. There's nothing to indicate that this child's having withdrawals. The proof is in the pudding. I don't know why they brought the addictionologist in here to leave it, because she simply did not understand the disease, and her statements were so far afield, and she absolutely could not explain why Maya was able to get through all these, stop from anywhere from a day up to 37 days, and never have the single sign of withdrawal. And the reason was there are no withdrawals. There aren't any. There was no reason to keep her there. There was no reason to keep her in the hospital. Maya should have been in and out, right? So on this January 7th, Beata shows up to support her daughter. And you know what? I don't know what went on with Maya in terms of whether she was using bad language, and I don't care, because nowhere in this record before or after any sign whatsoever of her done anything even remotely like that. And you've spent 8 weeks around. Ask yourself, is she really the type to do that? Keep in mind also, though, she had steroid course, significant period of time, and there was no paneling when she went in to figure out what she was on. And then she was put back on a bunch of narcotics. It doesn't really matter because they weren't looking at the history. Something happened back there. Beata Kowalski and that team, who I still can't figure out. I think it was Tepa Sanchez. I think that Dr. Malik was back there, some nurses. But something happened back there that ticked them off. They got...
overruled you.
All right. So back there, I'm not sure who said what, but I'm sure with Beata's personality, he did was start to say, we were just here 6 days ago, and by the way, we've been coming here. You're supposed to be our hospital. You're supposed to be our doctor. Why are you putting us through this? Why are you questioning everything that I say here? I don't want Maya to have a blood pressure cuff, because do you understand about allodynia? Do you understand about how this disease is? I've been coming here for forever. Why don't you pick up on the challenge? And there must have been some words back, and somehow, somewhere, they decided to completely change over the diagnosis, whether they did it immediately in the record or whether they simply did it every way they approached and everybody that told outside. There's no question that they tried to change the narrative. And walking in as a normal family, a child with debilitating disease, they walked out suddenly with Beata as the enemy. And Maya was making all of this up, and that Beata was somehow encouraging. So whatever happened, and I'm pretty sure, was that Beata started to ask, and she started to take down those names, started to ask because remember, within the first 4 hours, they called risk management. 4 hours, which they'd had for a year and a half. They called risk. Something else. Very interesting. One of my first, she was the social worker was brought in, and it wasn't her regular gig. She was brought in to help, and she sat down with the Kowalski. She said that they were like every other family with a child that was in a lot of pain and with a desperate disease. They were incredibly concerned, but she didn't see any signs whatsoever of abnormal behavior. And this is the social worker. This is the one that's supposed to pick up on. Another thing to keep in the back of your mind is never whether there are any psychosocial problems. Are there any psychiatric issues going on here? Is there something going on that maybe we didn't spot over the past 15 months? The doctors, there's not a very after that. Sally Smith, why were they bringing her in? Why did they have her checking records on October 8th, the next day, without the Kowalski authority, by the way, and without consent, without their knowledge? Why was she going in there and looking back at all these records? What was her role? Sally Smith eventually comes to see them. She doesn't identify herself as Sally Smith. Whatever she's trying to say up there, you know she came in a lab coat, and she came in with her doctor's pass. You know she walked in, and she started to try to get information without identifying her, trying to set up a case or some complaint. She was the hammer that they might need down the road. Should the Kowalski come back, make any complaints? Remember, this was a place where if the person complained, there was the person complained, then there was a chance their job. Nobody was complaining up and down, and no one wanted to hear any complaints about them. And here was Beata taken down in panic, decided they weren't going to let brusque lady with an Eastern European accent coming in, telling them how to do their job and what they could do and not do, and test to do and not do, right? They got really, really upset at being bossed around by, and she was a nurse too, which made it even worse. Why are they so worked up about Beata Kowalski infusion, giving child infusion? I never made the connection there. So after that, you can see here, well, beforehand, you can see the times leading up to it. After this, there's a psychological evaluation, January 6, 2017, by Dr. Dr. Duncan. You got that back there. There's no problem. They bring in Dr. Lewis, who's working for state. It's not one of their doctors working state. You got to look beyond Dr. Lewis. Whatever Maya's saying, he's putting down what he wants to say to try to support a narrative. But even he can't bring himself to say that this is psychosomatic. He says you got to get a pediatric neurologist to confirm whether or not there's a physiological basis, right? So Sally Smith is in here, and all of a sudden Sally Smith starts running the show. She was an apparent agent. Under the definition that you're going to get to check yes on apparent agent, if proven through the testimony of Elena, also accent, and also had the same Sally Smith in a white lab coat, starting to ask questions. No introduction. No, hi, I'm Dr. Smith. What can I do? That. No, probing questions to try to see what could be uncovered. Kowalski. And remember, this was a hospital that was under immediate of losing these for work. They didn't want anybody rocking. But in any event, they talk staying. They tell them, we're going to help here, we're going to help there. And Beata says, no, we're going to go back, like we did on the first, to Dr. Hannah. And we're going to complete the ketamine infusions because you guys can't help it. No doubt, Beata brought her in to see if there could be an intubation, greater amounts of ketamine, to try to get her out of this crisis. When they couldn't do it, she concluded, why are we here? And tried to leave. She was told, well, if you leave, then you're AMA, and we're going to call security. And that's in the record. So they were forced as much. They tried to dig around in the records, ask, do you believe they really wanted to stay in that hospital when there was no reason to do so? Maya was not getting the care she wanted, the parents. You know, there's a lot of people watching. There's a lot of people. There are CRPS. There are parents who have children, Christ, you're out. A lot of people, and in this instance, and it's important here, consider what was behind this. So through the course of the time from October 7th up until the 13th order, they desperately went out of, but were not allowed out of place, although they tried to talk them into. Johns Hopkins did their best to try to convince Kowalski, well, she's got withdrawal symptoms, she'll have withdrawal symptoms, we need to wean her down, everything you've been wrong. And you know what? The Kowalskis were at least listening to them. They didn't buy it, but they were at least listening. They weren't cooperative with this, but all they wanted to do was get out of there and get someplace where Maya could be properly treated. That's the reason he meant. They had no reason to stay there. They didn't want Maya under hospital's care if the hospital didn't do anything for him. That's called false imprisonment, and that's where you would check yes on that. Been around here, but in your verdict form, it's interesting. You've got different events, okay, and you're going to be asked individual questions about. And so this is one of them. Another one is when Sally Smith and Kathy Beatty and company pinned her down on January 6th. That's another one. Right. He's right. I'm interested here. You know, her motto was live, had everything to live with, and she died with the same passion. Consider the fact she came from a communist country and saw her father dragged out of the house by the powers that be, right? Beata Kowalski gave her life, child. She knew. Beata was prescient. She knew something was going on in that hospital, and she had been told repeatedly about how her daughter was suffering. And she knew enough to just listen to her daughter. You heard the phone calls to know what was going on. And every time somebody saw her daughter, any of the neighbors that got in, any of the priest, anyone else who got in, she was pumping them for information. She knew exactly what was going on. And so as Maya started to get worse and worse and worse, the anxiety of Beata up and up until the came about, finally, Beata determined unless something drastic was done, a pretty good chance her daughter was going to die in this hospital. Why? She'd already seen a friend's daughter in CRPS. CRPS can kill you. And in this instant, where you've got someone who is becoming so weak that they're laying down, they can't even hold themselves up, you're subject to blood clots and go to heart and kill. And that's what Beata was concerned about. There was retaliation against me because they knew I was going after the ICU. Filing charges with me with DCF automatically makes them immune. But what it says here is that Beata knew what was going on with her daughter and knew she had to something drastic. She knew they were retaliating against her. She knew that she was the key. If she was in the picture, Maya was never going to get out of there. And it was likely that Maya was going to end up in foster and in some situation where she would be even worse. She knew she did not like. The best hope would be that her daughter lived. Foster did not understand, or was placed in a situation where she was going to be in psychiatric care. And the rest of her life, Beata knew, because she was a nurse, that Maya would be followed through her entire life, dogged by these allegations that somehow there was a psychosis going on. Afterwards, Dr. Pepa Sanchez writes, and says, he's talking to Dr. Laura Vos, I learned today that Ketamine Girl's mom committed suicide yesterday. Sorry to say my prediction was correct. That means it had happened before. They knew about it, and yet they still kept pressure. They still kept the pressure on Beata. Oh my God. They still thought somehow the right thing pushed Beata the edge and over. They knew she was on the edge and kept up the pressure. There's no question but that suicide was caused directly by their action. On the verdict form, what you're going to see is a few things, but one of them is there's two bases, and you heard Dr. Richards testify about both of them. One is, was it a substantial factor? Were their actions a substantial factor? Suicide. Submit. Absolutely. The second was, did she operate from an irresistible impulse? The irresistible impulse in this instance was there was nothing she could do about it. She knew she didn't protect her daughter here. She was going to lose her daughter. And Beata knew also. She thought through the effect of her being out of the picture. She knew it'd be tough on Kyle. She knew it would be tough on Maya and Jack. But she figured having Maya alive was better than losing. She knew they'd get through some. Could not stand the thought of losing a girl. Please take care of Maya. Don't make her suffer. She doesn't deserve that. No child. Insofar as the verdict on suicide, question check. And it's important, very important, that you answer questions 45, 46, 47, 48, and 55 in the positive. If you want a recovery for Jack and for Kyle, these are the causes of action for wrongful death. And they are allowed to recover based on being beneficiary of the estate. So that if you want to award damage to Jack, the loss of his wife, Kyle, for the loss of his mother, then you have to determine that there was an intentional infliction of emotion. And under that definition, by any definition, this was emotional distress that was absolutely outrageous. You just don't do what they did a little girl like. You just don't take away a gift. You don't tell her that her mother's crazy. You don't tell her that her mother is in a mental institution. You don't pat her. And you know what? They were patting her. Beatty would come in and pat her on the way in and way out. She was trying to develop evidence so that she could say, oh, she never reacted to that. She must not have had allodynia. You don't put a child on your lap. You do not cuddle with a child, and you sure don't kiss a child. There was no authorization whatsoever, and Maya loathed Beatty. Remember the attorney, Zimmerman, who said it came off in wave how much he disliked. Maya did not consent to anything, and what they did continue to put pressure all the way. So let me talk a little bit about your verdict. There's so much to talk about and down on. Under false imprisonment, your claim won. I submit there's more than enough evidence to show that they were falsely imprisoned. Maya was falsely imprisoned on the occasion of October 7th through October 13th. And then you're asked to put down damages for her pain and suffering and for mental and psychological expenses and the reasonable value of hospitalization. And that question repeated several times through this on each one of the first few two claims. What I suggest you do in trying to determine exactly how much to award is that you make a determination of the gross amount of pain and suffering, loss of capacity, joy, life, mental anguish, and you determine the big, because you're going to have to determine that for intentional infliction of emotional stress and malpractice, okay? And then you go back and you assign a percentage of that to each one of the events, because each one of the events are set out separately, and you're supposed to award damages separate. Now you have in your records there, you've got the $10 million plus for Dr. Bifulco's plan, for his life care plan. And that then spread out among the first two based on percentage that you see are the most severe. If you determine, for instance, that the January 6, 2017 incident where she was stripped, pinned down, photographed against her will, if you determine that that one is one of the most severe, you would put the highest percentage. So do the math first. Figure out, and we're next to give you some ideas, figure out using and we've got the formula in there, figure out the number of days that she was down. Remember how we had them fill out all of these forms to tell you how many days was really affecting. And then you need to talk among yourselves and figure out an hourly rate. Now we use hourly rate for a lot of different things in our lives. And this is the best way we have come up with to measure what happened. So you would take the hourly rate that you determine, and Nick's going to go over the remainder of it, but you're going to multiply it out against the amount of years left of days. I'll let him talk. But then what we want you to do is come back and give percentage as to each one events. And that way you'll be able to capture all of the instruction there about don't duplicate. It's a good way of making sure that that does not happen. If you use it by percentages after determining the entire amount of pain and suffering, loss of capacity, joy, life,
life mental anguish. So you have a series of questions in your first few pages about false imprisonment, and you'll be asked about how to give the numbers for each one of those. Then you've got battery, and it is the battery for the psychological, whether they committed battery on Maya Kowalski on January 6th. I think everyone here agrees the test that Maya was battered. And then, like I said, you have separate questions there, right? The damage. Then it's a second one, claim 2, battery, hugs, kiss, and pats. In this instance, we're talking about the instances where Kathy Beatty is hugging her, patting her, kissing her, putting her on the lap, but it's broader than that. It can't be duplicative. That's why I say come up percentage after you determine the total. And then there are claims total. And it's important to emphasize the damages for these to begin with because they are what we call core event. They are the batteries, the false imprisonments, and the things done to them, out of which many of the other causes of action, particularly into emotional stress, are based. So if you're going to award damages economic, they need to be heavily weighted towards the first two causes of action, battery and false. Then you get to medical malpractice. In this instance, you heard testimony from Dr. Chopra. You heard testimony from Dr. Eli Neuberger that they deviated from the accepted standard, and you'll be asked then, again, divide out damages for that medical malpractice. But again, that's a much bigger. On moving to and you have to, by the way, on medical malpractice, you have to go through conduct of Sally Smith. For Sally Smith, here's what you consider. Sally Smith shouldn't have even been there. She was an apparent agent. An apparent agent is someone who presents themselves as though they are part of the hospital. You know she did, and there's backup. But she's in there, and they're responsible for her. But Sally Smith was telling them to take her all the way off medication, telling them to put her in the room for 48 hours. Those doctors are also responsible because they should have rejected. They should have said, what are we doing here? By the way, one of the defenses they're going to talk about is, oh, this is all medically authorized because they signed a medical authorization to start. That's if it was medical. This was not medical, and you haven't heard any evidence of any discussion that it was medical. If you look at the records before and after these dates, the October 18th, 19th, 48 hours, look before and after that. No medical discussion whatsoever. This wasn't for medicine. This was for the purpose of developing evidence. If you look again in the January 6th, Kathy Beatty in the photographs, the idea was, well, they're authorized to take photographs only if it was for a medical reason. This wasn't a medical reason. They did not discuss it before or after. This was not for reason trying to diagnose or treat Maya. This was to help them for their other goal and to frankly take things out. Kowalski. On fraudulent billing, claim 4. This has to do with the amount of money that was billed for CRPS when they denied in everything else that she had CRPS. Now they're going to try to mix that in here. Don't let them. The CRPS, in every way outside of that billing, they not treat it as CRP. And they represented to the outside world that it was not CRP. If you go to the discharge summary, you'll see CRPS is not listed. So what they did is they billed for a bunch of stuff that they actually did not do. They weren't treating her CRPS. They weren't doing the things you do. Keep in mind, Katzenstein only gave her 5 hours of therapy through the course of 97 days. Got it. And so checking yes to that, and then as to the damages on this, for various reasons, these are going to be what are known as nominal damage care of later. So these are going to be review the facts, you see the evidence involving any increase in insurance or any copays, you put that down. If you cannot find specifics on that, you put $1, the nominal, and that'll be taken care of later. Then we get to count 5, survivor claim for infliction of emotional distress for the estate of Beata Kowalski. This is the manner in which you can compensate Beata and the rest of her family for her loss. You check yes, then they can be. You check no, you cannot. And then determine the best you can her pain and suffering, mental anguish, and extreme caused by the extreme emotional stress prior to, we'll talk a little bit about that. Claim 6 on the estate. Again, they're going to go through whether or not this was an uncontrollable impulse to die by suicide. We suggest you check yes. And whether it was a substantial factor, it was too, and that you check yes. And of course, the top 136, did Johns Hopkins Hospital, the ACTS employees engage in extreme and outrageous conduct? Yes. And then you get into damages. Now, you've seen the report, the net accumulations, the amount of money that Beata would have made and they would have had for the family, deducting from that their living, which Christy Kirby has already done for you in her report. And then it's the damages of surviving spouse, Jack Kowalski. And here, again, we just use our method for how to compute damage, which figure out for hour by hour the value of lost wife. Everything goes in source of comfort, support, the waking up at 4 a.m., not all of those goes in how. And so what you would do there, and I'm suggesting evidence in the record, anywhere from minimum wage, which is like $12, up to, there's evidence in the record of $700. We put 100 in, you can go twice that, times that. Whatever you determine as jurors is the best way to express the loss. And so you go through the amount there, and then you get to go finally to survival damage of Kyle Kowalski. We haven't talked to about Kyle a lot, but he lost it. He's not going to have his mother there. Many of the there. He's not going to be there. He's not going to be there. The comfort report hits out. And there really is no way adequate compensation. And the only thing we can do here, the way we do it, because it's the only way we can show. And remember, this is not a reward. You're not rewarding the trying to measure law. You're trying to express the law. And then intentional infliction of emotional stress of Maya. Maya lost. I don't even know how. Maya will be affected. You have life table. Will not be there. Help Maya. Will not be there. Stress and strain of life. Will not be there. It is not to be there. Maya remote. For that, you have life. Go back, multiply the number of days. Then you sign and. There is so much to talk about in this case. I haven't spent as much time on liability as I'd like to, let alone about Kathy Beatty. Beatty had mental problems. There was something. And when you say, as she said in one of those statements there, brought up for her behavior, you want to take this outside. What does that mean? That means she's trying to fist fight with the other employee. It was on November 20th, 2nd. Was it really logical and reasonable to have somebody with that type of personality assigned to Maya? And why did Maya need somebody assigned to her to begin with? Why did you have somebody follow her around all the time, floor to floor? What was going on there? They had a plan. And the plan was to force Maya to agree with them that she really didn't have pain and force Beata to take some action. Some action would make her even more vulnerable. We don't know how. Now we know how she acted out. But they were hoping for some outrageous action out of Beata that gives them power. Admit to you that Beatty wanted Maya. I'll come back and talk to you for a second. And the other side get a chance to talk. Be back.
Last time he gave me a whiteboard and I sat right there, had to scribble it out. This time he gave me time to do it, and now he's left me 10 minutes. So here we go. I'm here to give you a task, decide what justice is. So I'm here formulas, $100, Maya, Kyle, Jack, and that's what justice requires. So we'll start. First, I want to take a look at the verdict form, claim 2, battery, page 8, question. January 6, 2017, you have lucid, uncontested on that date, the battery of Maya, and over objection, Catherine direction. Question 8 is where you award damages each of these categories. That's why I'm for each of these, you make separate calculations. Pain and suffering, mental anguish is its own. Loss of capacity for enjoyment of life is its own category. And each of them, we calculated the past. I recognize some of you probably have mathematical skills better than the others, so I'd ask you to lean on those folks as you're back at the calculator trying to figure this out. So let's go through some examples of how you would calculate these categories. You pull up slide 57. Well, this bucket of different categories described here, we've called them damage. And so to talk through not all of them because you have to do this for each claim. There are 2 separate battery claims, 3 separate false and stress for Maya. There's medical malpractice. Each of them, you have to do this calculation. Mr. Anderson was saying, once you come up with total figure, then you decide, PTSD, what Maya's suffering, 50% of this was due to really focused on this battery on January 6th. I don't know. That's your job to allocate once you have this. If we go to slide 59, I'm going to show you the first calculation. All right. Maya Kowalski testified that she experiences and has experienced mental anguish 15 hours a day on average, a good week and a bad week. Since this horrific saga ended at Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital in 6.8, you can check our math on that, the day since it was discharged. And if you apply the rate of $100 an hour past mental anguish in dollars, past mental anguish, 1, the category battery. Now we have to do the same thing. You'll have the life care tables back there with you there to exhibit mortality. Exhibit 2060, there's page 002, and there's pages 47 to check that our economist, when she came in here, is Maya's life expectancy mortality. Do the same math. We take the hours per day that Maya, days per year, we take the years remaining in Maya's life, we multiply that figure, $34.8 million for Maya's, if you go advancement, the total past, future mental, then you allocate that. If you'll back up to slide 55, we have, in addition to damage, and these are directly from Tess D. Kirby, economist, and the life care plan. This is when I was writing on the whiteboard. If you go to slide 56, this is the essence. At a wage or an annual earnings of approximately $100,000, we would submit to underestimate Maya before this all happened. The loss of earning capacity is $5 million. And then you have future medical expense, and this was based on testimony of Dr. Mafolka, Kirby coming in present value calculation, $10 million. So now you have economic damage to Maya Kowalski in dollars. You'll see the ability to compensate Maya Kowalski for loss of capacity. Place example, you'll see the ability to medical. Then I need to go to the verdict for a moment to look at question 34, 30, and 30. Mr. Anderson discussed this. Unlock your ability to compensate for Justin, Maya, Beata, Jack, and Kyle. You need to answer yes on question. The Johns Hopkins Hospital extreme and outrageous Beata. You need to answer yes to that question, and then you'll advance to question 36 on the next. And question 36, you need to answer yes. And if you answer questions yes, then you have the opportunity to adjust Jack and Kyle. If you answer no to this question, you'll only be compensated. Having checked yes on questions 34 and 36, now we have to discuss what the wrongful death damage. So if we go to slide 63, we're going to talk first about Beata's loss. What's a loss? And this is just legal jargon for if Beata had survived this onslaught, how much would she have earned her wages as of the time of her death and team? Adjusted inflation, adjusted back for present value. This is the number, $650,000. Then we go to Jack's wrongful death, is slide 6. There are two categories here, and direct, which are at 40. Put those up for just a minute. All right, right there. Questions 40 and 41. The damages for Jack Kowalski for the loss of Beata. He has two primary categories. The first, the loss of. This was again a number Kirby calculated based on a wage $20 an hour, taking him fishing, doing laundry. That number I'll show you in a moment. I also want to show you that 41, you get to compensate Jack Kowalski the loss of Beata. So if we go back to slide 60. All right. As I mentioned, Christy Kirby, the math, I said $20 an hour, $20.10 in the past, $4. Total services lost by Mr. Kowalski to Beata, being a good spouse, $801,000. That's next slide, loss of Beata. Now we get into calculations that are similar to Maya. Jack has seen the same $100 for the numbers are lower for Jack. So if we show here the past calculation, he testified against 18 hours a day. We $3.4 million losing Beata's companionship. And then for future, again, this is based on the mortality table, 19.4 years remaining life, expecting $9 million future loss of Beata's total. The $100 figure is up to you. The hours per day is you judge the credibility, and you go back in your note to hours per day, and you arrive at you have to do the same thing. I'm not going to show you another calculation, but in question 1, loss of his wife's category, pain and suffering is a separate. Do a similar calculation for Jack's. Let's advance to slide 68. Having done those calculations at $100 an hour, this is the figure we suggest to you. Jack's wrong. Now I'm going to show you how to more calculation. Kyle under the wrongful death mere Maya. So slide 6. Now each of Maya and Kyle have the loss of guy, not having a mom or bake with, figure skating. This is what Kyle testified to. Kyle's stoic, quiet. He testified to 8 hours. Do the same calculation in the past as much for Maya. For loss of parental companionship, $2 million in the past. The future over his life, not having a mom, thinking about those 3 months and that day that he saw his mom in the garage. $17 million. And then total for Kyle Kowalski, you're only up 19. So then we advance to slide 77. I'm sorry, 76. All right. Having performed those calculations, 2 categories, Kyle, we submit $1 million is a starting. Next slide, please. And then total up the wrongful death damage. And you know what? I'm going to skip. Go to slide 70. Having this math, the $100 an hour, and checking yes on the appropriate question would arrive at a figure of to tell you that's basic plot. Boys lost back their father from magic spells. At the end, there's a $100 an hour figure. We submit these three. $100 for an hour with their mom, their wife would do it. $1,000. We don't think $100 an hour is appropriate. We ask you to deliver justice.
Plaintiff part. Are you concluding your first part of your closing arguments?